My buddy Jordan Holt is an amazing artist and an amazing art teacher, and he thinks very deeply about the stuff that he creates, but also about the things that he consumes. And we talked about that recently, just a few days ago. And I recorded the call. It was about an hour Zoom call where we just sort of shared with each other our thoughts. It's interesting because I think Jordan and I share a lot of common foundational beliefs, common foundational values, common foundational understanding of the world. I think Jordan and I look at some of these new emerging technologies like AI, or even things that have been around for a while, like cell phones and the internet and social media. And I think we both see the issues that are there, and as well as the positives. Um, but he has a little bit different perspective than I do because he's a father and a teacher, so he interacts with younger people a lot more and sees the effect on younger people a lot more closely than I do. And despite having all these similarities, I think we've probably made some different choices in how we're going to interact with this technology. For him, it's more of a sort of a laying aside. You can't do without it; it's impossible. But he's going to rely on it less and less. Whereas I really have fun embracing the new things and seeing what is there to take hold of. And I try to take an optimistic view of new technologies as often as I can. But the way he and I talk about it in this conversation that you're about to watch, I think brings some context to this sort of spectrum of fear and optimism. And I think that both the way Jordan has chosen to deal with it and the way I have chosen to deal with it, I think are okay decisions, and I think are wise decisions. But I think that they can't be made alone in a vacuum. He's got to consider his family and his students and the school for which he works. I have to consider the impact of the things that I choose to use and how it's going to affect the people around me and their privacy and their security and energy concerns and all this kind of stuff. Where do you find yourself on this spectrum? I'm just curious. Maybe you have even different ideas than we do about some of these things. If you have different ideas or if you have further questions on this topic, feel free to leave those in the comments. Enjoy this discussion between me and Jordan Holt. It'll last about an hour, and I'll come back at the end to wrap it up with some final thoughts. So I was looking at your post about the book, and I'm not familiar with the book, and I had not heard of it, and I've not obviously not read it, and but I liked your comments around it, and it was sort of adjacent to some stuff that I've been discussing with a couple of friends this week, and then I also have a specific um, question about a specific thing that you said in your video that I'd like to just talk a little more about. But if you'll indulge me for like 5 to 7 minutes,
Mhm.
I'll lay out what I've been talking about with my friends and then sort of get your thoughts on it. And it starts with the 1920s film King Kong. All right. So huge,
And isn't that 1933 though?
yeah, whatever. The old movie, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So the King Kong comes out, right? It's the first time anyone has ever seen a giant gorilla fighting a giant dinosaur, stuff like that. I mean,
Mm.
people have read the book. Maybe there have been some other attempts in the silent era or whatever, but like that was the big one. That was the one where everybody was like, "Oh wow!" And it was a big um, spectacle. It was a big phenomenon at the time. So now fast forward to Peter Jackson. He's made the Lord of the Rings films, which I mean, the imagination and the creativity and everything there. I realize a lot of that stuff is pretty detailed, I guess, from Tolkien's writing, but to be able to turn that into something that you can look at and believe that those creatures exist, is quite a feat of technology and imagination and those sorts of things. And so, um, now that he's done that, he says, "Okay, my next project, I want to remake King Kong." And I just remember thinking at the time, why do you want to do that? Like, because that particular thing everybody's seen before. The stuff you just got finished doing is stuff that nobody had seen before. That was a lot of that was really incredible. Um, but like we've seen King Kong, people know it. We don't really know this story. I don't even really know what the story. I don't remember the story. That's not why people watch it really for the story. And so I just thought, why is he? And it wasn't like a small project. They spent $350 million producing this movie. That's not even the advertising, everything. That was just the production budget, and which even now is a lot of money, but at that time it was an insane amount of money to spend on a project because he basically had a blank check after Lord of the Rings to do whatever he wanted. And I just thought, why are you doing this? Because this was also at a time where Lord of the Rings was on the front of this a little bit, but it was at a time where so many movies had these battle scenes where like thousands of soldiers would be running towards each other for the, the big battle. And it just kind of wasn't impressive anymore because we all knew that it was computers doing it, it wasn't real people. It was impressive in the 60s when it was actually thousands of people or something in a
Yeah.
situation mill or whatever. But um, but it just kind of stopped being impressive to the general public because everybody knows some nerd hits a button and two monsters jump out of a computer and fight each other. And it's, you and I know there's still a lot of artistry to it. There's still a lot of, I use Blender a lot. It's quite complicated, and I've been learning 3D stuff since I was in high school, and so there's still an artistry and a craftsmanship and all that stuff to it. But for whatever reason, the general public just isn't as impressed by it anymore because they've now seen anything somebody thinks of can appear on the screen. And so now it is less about sort of the spectacle of seeing something that you've never seen before, but more about like the imagination and the storytelling and using that as a tool. CG stuff just alone was very impressive in the beginning, but like after that, people were like, okay, they kind of we get it, we get kind of bored with it. Same way people get a little bit of fatigue from the superhero movies and all the green screen stuff or whatever. But anyway, so he makes this King Kong movie. And I'm sure it looks great. I'm sure the story was good. I didn't watch it. I didn't care anything about it. And apparently a lot of other people didn't either because I mean it made money. I'm sure it made a billion worldwide or whatever, but particularly in the US, it didn't do what you would hope for a film that you spent $350 million making. And I don't know that what I was thinking is the reason why it didn't perform as well, but I mean, I think so. Um, I think, this technology had come to a certain point and people were just like, eh, and sort of going back to the old things like, tell me a good story, right? So
Mhm.
back out of that a little bit and look at cinema as a whole. So you have in the early days of cinema, you are all of the cinema language advancements are what can we do with this new medium, and even things that are sort of technical like editing, which had to be invented at some point. Oh, let's take two things and tape them together, and let's cut something. Let's move the camera closer. Those kind of things. They really were about not so much the technical thing itself, but they were sort of explorations of what can we do with the film form, given these very rudimentary tools that we currently have, the cinematograph and a pair of scissors and some tape, right? And so you look at the work of the montage guys in the 20s, the Russians, the Germans, the French, and like the City Symphony films and Man with a Movie Camera and stuff like that. Just really incredible use of film form that would really dazzle even a modern audience. Then we bring in a microphone, and it's like everything comes to a screeching halt because the microphones are huge, and in order to keep them in sync with the camera has a motor, and the motor's loud, so the camera has to be blimp. So now the camera can't hardly move. You can't hide the microphone anywhere. It's always in like a flower pot or behind a column or something. The lighting is the film stocks are slow, all this kind of stuff. So bringing the microphone in sort of all of a sudden made stopped from this medium from really growing as its own medium, and we started doing a lot more like filmed radio shows or filmed theater. There became a lot more of that element now that you have the dialogue and have the narrative in there. And so rather than just a visual medium, now it's this audio visual medium, and that just determined the evolution of the cinema language. And really, from that, in my opinion, from that point on until kind of recently, most cinema language evolution and development really stemmed from not really technique, adventurous technique and innovations in technique, but came from innovations in the technology. We've got smaller cameras. We can move them around. We got smaller microphones. A lot of technology that was invented during Citizen Kane was carried forward and used for different things. Faster film stocks, brighter lights. You get all kind of around the same time. You get batteries and smaller motors and portable recording equipment. And now you can do the chase scene from Bullet, in the 70s, because you got these portable cameras. You can film Easy Rider riding around these motorcycles and stuff, shooting at the side of a car and things that you couldn't have done, 20 years previous, just technologically. You got zoom lenses and faster film stocks. You can shoot available light. Now you can go on location. And it certainly develops the cinema language, but it's so rooted in now the technology allows us to do this, so we'll go shoot at somebody's house instead of shoot on a studio. But does that necessarily change the cinema craft technique part of it very much, you know? So um, I feel like recently this has started to shift for the same reason as the King Kong idea. It's like, well, now everybody knows you can do anything. So certainly there will still be technological innovations to the cinema craft. But at this point, I think the general public is kind of super saturated with it. People like me that are really into the making of it and how these things are constructed might be interested in some of the stuff coming along. But basically, uh, people don't want to be technically innovated at anymore. They, that's cool. We get it. You can do anything. Now just tell us a good story worth watching. Don't stop wasting my time. Right. And so I think it's interesting to me that we had this big arc of innovation, but now because we're kind of super saturated with it, we're now finally starting to get back to a point where we were way back in the beginning, which is where the artisans and the craftsmen are doing the innovation out of technique and with the medium itself rather than just technological stuff. I think a good example of this is Christopher Nolan. He does a lot with playing with time and moving time around. Memento was there was that was a reason Memento was such a big deal when it came out. Just the narrative structure of it being sort of turned around. One of the big things that he does well, he definitely does it in Inception. I think he does it in one or two of the Batman films also. But in Inception, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character is explaining to the new girl what they're going to do. Here's how we're going to do this. And you start this montage, and as he's saying what we're going to do, you see them sort of doing it. And in your mind, because it began with him saying, "Here's what we're going to do." Everything you're looking at is sort of in the future, but you're watching it happen. And by the time the montage is over, everything's in the past. And it's this really brilliant sort of time jump that you don't even realize happens until it's over. And I've just always thought, oh, that's such a brilliant way to like get through a bunch of exposition and cram it over a bunch of action and jump through a bunch of time without the audience even realizing that they're being, expositioned to the entire time. And so I think things like that are innovations in the medium itself, regardless of the technologies available. Certainly, Nolan makes use of the new technologies, but he also makes use of the old one. He just takes whatever's available to him. And I think that's where CG sort of lands now for a lot of people. Is it's one of the many tools that I can use. I can use models, I can use in-camera stuff, I can use CG, just whatever the best tool is. And it's no longer about trying to dazzle people with your effects and things. And so now we're back at this place where it's like with new streaming series and with the golden age of television, starting with Mad Men and Breaking Bad. I think people are just like, just tell me a good story. Give me some captivating characters, which is what it kind of all was about, sort of in the beginning. Okay, back out one more level now and look at culture as a whole. Okay, in 1200, who did you know? I mean, you knew the 100, 200 people that were in your village. Where did you get all your information? Well, it was the church at the center of the village, was basically the center of all the information. It was literally mass communication, right? It's like you went there to where the church congregation was, and that's where everybody had their socializing and their stories and all that kind of stuff. And you were just sort of relegated to the people that you knew. And then, we get the printing press, which is amazing. And then we get radio, and then we get television and movies, and then we get the internet. And now we have this AI stuff. And, some a large group of experiences over the past couple of years, including the AI stuff, is starting to show us that it's really hard to know what to trust. It's really hard to know who's an expert or what is an expert. When experts disagree, which expert do I listen to? The people who have been sort of the foundational, keystone bastions of we have the news for you. We're telling you what's going on. We're showing you, what's good and what's wrong. And we feel like we don't know if we can trust that anymore or not, because it's sort of biased from either direction, and we don't know which bias to go with, maybe sometimes. And I feel like with the AI stuff, this Sora thing that came out this week, I've been playing around with it. It's absolutely stupid. It's a total time waster. It's tons of fun. Clearly, it's been trained on a bunch of copyrighted intellectual property that I'm sure was not licensed, and of course, my dad is like, well, this sounds awful because it sounds like you could make anybody look like they're doing anything. And certainly, Sam Altman has made his Cameo available for anybody to use. And some of the first things people did with it within the first day, having him commit crime, stealing things out of a store with security cam footage, having him doing and saying offensive things, just to sort of the Raptors testing the fences, in the first week of this
Yeah.
thing live.
Internet just doing internet things. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And I saw somebody post one of these sort of offensive things with Sam Altman's face, and then somebody had quote tweeted and said, "This is actually brilliant because who could ever accuse Sam of doing anything wrong anymore? He can never be canceled
Mm.
because there's so many of these things out there that's like, well, somebody else could have made that. It's like you wouldn't believe an offensive thing about him if you saw it now." And that got me thinking, like, our technology has now sort of come all the way to the point where I don't know the information to trust. I don't know and so what information do we trust? These old physical books. What information do we trust? The people around me who care about me and the people that are close to me that I can sort of hold accountable and can hold me accountable. What values and philosophies do I trust? Now this is going to vary for different people, but for me, and I think for you, it's like, well, I have these values that are 2,000 years old and they haven't changed, and they've served every civilization and every people group and every language since then and before. And I'm going to hold on to those because I believe that those are unchanging when everything else is chaos. And I find myself slowly, you see all these people going off grid, you see all these people homeschooling, you see all these people putting gardens in their backyard. And suddenly it's like, it's a lot like the 1200s. We're going a lot back to that very close, sort of touchable community while we embrace all this technological stuff. Um, I don't really have a point with all this. It's mostly just an observation, and I just feel like it's something that, especially with the post that you had about that book the other day, that I feel like you would have some thoughts along these lines.
Well, it does seem that technology in general is it kind of accumulated such a fever pitch over a long period of time, and its primary selling point for human beings has always been some advantage, something that you're allowed to do, or something novel that you're allowed to see that comes from each thing. Now, as time has gone on and these have kind of collapsed in on each other, we kind of get less and less also off of each new thing,
Diminishing
right?
returns.
Yeah, because I mean, the advances in AI video, for example, just take that as an isolated example. They're so fast and they come so frequently that it's um, basically like an afternoon on Twitter is the most that it gets in terms of attention. But when you were running down the list of major innovations, you jumped from the printing press to the radio because those feel pretty close together. And I'm sure if I'm sitting here and I'm thinking through a list of technologies, I can come up with more stuff. But if I then compare that over the last month, you're probably looking at something borderline comparable over a century, not terribly long ago.
Yep.
So one of my curiosities throughout all of this, because it was really I grew up in a technological environment. I was a techie kid. I was interested in electronics. I was interested in every new gadget. I was fascinated by all that stuff. So I've found myself gravitating into a much more physical world and deliberately, intentionally. And it's because, in part, I feel like I'm starting to see that what used to enamor me has many, many downsides, and that you never truly get whenever technology promises you something. You never quite get just a boon without giving something up. It's transactional. Technology is very transactional. And
There's
so
there, there's a
sometimes
line
you look,
in I'm sorry, there's a line
yeah.
in Inherit the Wind where he
Mm,
says, if you want planes, then you have to have the pollution in the air. If you want the phone call, then you have to be interrupted. And it's that
yeah.
that trade-off of everything.
There are some of these where, and this is the reason why I won't say I'm just anti-tech or something like that. Well, there's a couple of reasons. One of them is defining technology is one of those complicated things that even in this book, the Against the Machine, Kings North talks about the fact that eventually you go back to the invention of language and you're
Yeah.
dealing with functionally a technology.
Yeah,
So that's
Kevin
not really the
Kelly.
question.
Yeah, Kevin Kelly talks about the alphabet as a
Yeah.
technology. Yeah.
Yeah, and it very much is because even the Phoenician alphabet from which we get Greek and Latin, was an innovation in how to write down language. Prior to that, it was far more complicated. You had pictographics, you had cuneiform, etc. So it was a huge leap forward, and it is a technology. So it's not a matter of technology versus no technology. Instead, it's looking at what technology is taking in addition to what it is giving, and looking to see what net gain is actually being given, and then evaluating that net gain in according to some kind of moral metric because some technologies are willing to sacrifice some things for goals that do not necessarily align with what I think is good for human beings. And human beings are not infinitely malleable, but rather we were created in accordance with a natural law. And that natural law, you could look at it and talk about it from an evolutionary psychology perspective of, there's certain expectations that humans have in terms of how they live that are very similar to the kind of nutritions that your body requires, you know. So you got some things that you just have to have. So it's not unreasonable to me to think, okay, some technologies are going to breach the threshold just like technologies in producing food, if you want to, think about it that way. Fritos, not really that good for you, turns out. I
Yeah.
like them, they're tasty, not really that good for you. If I go onto a diet of that, I will suffer severe adverse effects. Well, the things that we do to ourselves psychologically with technology are probably having very similar negative effects, but there's a strange taboo about discussing those. You kind of get lumped in very quickly into a category of being anti-technology. And so we end up with these kind of hard, um, extreme positions of either allow every kind of technological innovation into your life, or you're someone who rejects technology entirely, which again, as we already mentioned, is kind of impossible. It's not really a thing you can't do. So somebody will just be infinitely trying to reduce if they find themselves in that position. So you kind of have to draw some sort of moral philosophical line and say, how does this technology contribute to the flourishing of human beings as defined by this moral system? Because the flourishing of human beings could mean infinite wealth, or it could mean infinite pleasure. My paradigm, the Christian paradigm, doesn't really allow for those infinite wealth and infinite pleasure. That's not what the goal is. So instead, I'm looking for something much more about a telos, a human telos. What is the natural ends to which I am oriented, which in most Christian traditions will be boiled down to something like to know God and to enjoy his presence forever. It's a really simple concept, but then quite difficult to employ in everyday life and quite difficult to navigate, but nonetheless remains kind of the orienting anchor by which I make decisions. And I feel like it's only in the last 4 or 5 years, really, in that, COVID changed everything for everybody. That was one of the things that affected me, is it put me in a situation of teaching on Zoom, and I immediately realized that everything I enjoyed about teaching was gone. It just vanished into nothingness. And then in the post-COVID environment, watching the kids come into college, and they were so affected by having done school in that way, it changed them
Yeah.
in ways that were not positive, and they were not enjoying the difference. They weren't aware that there was any alternative, but they were not enjoying the difference and seeing how smartphones have impacted them. From my college experience, which is now, almost 20 years ago, uh, to theirs, they have no idea how little people interact with each other versus what they used to. You go into a classroom and there's just dead silence because every student in the 10 minutes leading up to class is getting in as much phone as they possibly can before they put it down. And once we start class, I'll tell them something like, put away your digital cocaine, or, something like that, because I just try to remind them consistently that you've been handed a drug and that you've grown up with, and you're not evaluating it like that. And in fact, the university as a large is actually promoting you to use these because we require them for all kinds of things on campus that if I had mentioned them, 15 years ago and said, this is going to lead to us making students bring these to chapel so that they can take attendance, somebody would have laughed me out of the room, right? And said, slippery slope argument. It's not going to happen. And yet here we are. So it's a logical conclusion that flows down, and clearly something has been stolen from these kids who do not know a different world. And it makes me look very critically at things that I have viewed as benign, technologies I have viewed as benign, ways of living. Why don't I know my neighbors? Why
Yeah.
don't I know my neighbors?
Yeah.
I live in rural Tennessee. Why don't I know them? And it's because we sit at home and we entertain ourselves. And we were doing that in the 80s.
Sure.
And the desire to go out and live in community with people as a form of entertainment and as a form of bonding, it turns out one of the things that helped us do that was not having an alternative. And so a certain amount of pressure was being applied. So very much like living in a previous period, I wouldn't have to watch my diet so carefully because couldn't go outside and dig up a bag of Fritos.
Yeah.
It was impossible. Everything that grew out of the ground was good for me, by and large, that would be grown on a farm.
You didn't have to
And meat
choose to
was
exercise
scarce.
because you would
Yeah.
be doing all this farming and leg work and lifting, and you'd have no
Yeah.
choice.
It turns out the lack of options actually in many ways promoted good behavior. And so we don't go back. You can't go back. And it raises that question of how do you live now? And it seems that you'll have to live in a way that Christianity has always understood to be the foundation of human life, which is self-denial and restraint. And applying that not just to uh, temptations to sin, applying that not just to temptations to violate one's own health, but also in the way in which we manage technology. I think that's the new place where we have to start to look at ourselves and say, um, are we actually living the way that God intends with technology? Which is a question that never crossed my mind from the year 2000 up until at least 2015. Never crossed my mind. And so that's led to me trying to ratify a philosophy of technology, to determine where lines could be drawn, should be drawn, and also leading me to read much more about history to try and see what is missing that I don't know is missing, and then also what are the things that I'm making too rosy about the past that might lead me to have kind of a flawed view of it. Because a lot of the trad movement that you see on the internet, really flawed notion of what anything traditional looked, what the past looked like, etc. And so I know I'm capable of making that same sort of intellectual error. And so studying history, I think, becomes a part of that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I so you mentioned self-denial a minute ago as sort of a core of the philosophy. I don't disagree with that, but I would do a C.S. Lewis Weight of Glory thing where rather than selflessness, let's frame it in terms of love. Greatest commands are
Mm.
love God and love your neighbor. And it's not loving to my neighbor to ignore them. It's not loving to my neighbor to fill up on slop all day and then regurgitate that back out to them in my interactions with them. You know, it's not loving to my neighbor to feed on, revenge videos or whatever, and then go out and then behave in that way to other people. It's not loving to God to ignore my time with Him just for self pleasure and things like that. So absolutely, it is self denial. But um, I try to frame it in terms of loving God and loving my neighbor and helping people trust and follow Jesus. Um,
Yeah, the two things are definitely coalesced, and maybe a good metaphor for it is what Tolkien uses at the beginning of the Silmarillion. Have you ever read the Silmarillion before? Okay, it's a very good creation narrative that he provides, and in that, you essentially have God creating through song. I think you get something kind of similar in Narnia, but there's this eruption of music, and that music brings forth life, and so all of this life then joins into the song. And essentially, what sin is within this sort of Tolkienian metaphor is the discord that is created. Discord is introduced into the song. And so, if you live in accordance with loving God, loving neighbor, with that sort of oneness of being with God, essentially what you're doing is you're putting yourself back into harmony with the song. And so, if I practice self-denial, it's in avoiding the sour notes so that I can play the song and in that self-denial find a richer outcome for the self.
um,
So I greatly appreciate the way that Tolkien frames that because it does put it, like you said, in that positive light. It allows that sense of contributing to something, not just refraining from sin, but living in virtue,
That's right.
which is a very different thing.
I'm totally fine with avoiding things, but I would rather focus and
Yeah.
reframe things in terms of where am I going, not what am I, staying
Yeah.
away from. Well, one of the specific questions that I had that you raised from the video the other day, because I've talked some about this AI stuff. I've done a couple of posts on my Substack about it. Um, you know, and I get a lot of this again from Kevin Kelly. I don't know if you know Kevin Kelly.
No.
He is a fellow believer of some kind. He is one of the co-founders of Wired Magazine, and he's a futurist, like 10,000 years into the future kind of thinking. He's the person like
Mhm.
Minority Report, they go to him, what is life going to be like in 30 years when this movie is set? And he gives them all the kinds of technologies that might exist and things.
Hmm.
And you can watch a video from him from 2 years ago, and he'll still be talking about things that we're just barely on the cusp of him. He's very good at sort of, especially with technology, sort of seeing where things are going. Very cool guy. But in some of his writing, he's talked about again this idea of technology. The alphabet is a technology, and so with the alphabet, you can write Shakespeare, you can write a love letter, you can write Mein Kampf. You can write
Mhm.
anything with the same alphabet. Or with this same idea of language. And I think he sort of, I don't want to speak for him, I guess, but I think he sort of takes this position that most technologies are generally inert. And I've sort of taken
Mhm.
that position. And I think that you specifically said something in that video sort of counter to that. And so I would like for you to maybe speak a little more about that.
Yeah, I think the neutrality of tools is one of those things that I always kind of took for granted. And um, the general disposition I think that I grew up around was that you take that as kind of for granted. That a tool is a tool. It's kind of fundamentally neutral. Um, However, it does seem that you can judge tools by their general outcomes, right? We talked about net gain, net loss, that kind of thing. So a hammer as a concept is a thing that we created to add an advantage in the construction of things. So it had a telos attached to it. So it's made to build.
Right.
You can also use it to destroy, but really only in the service of building is what it's designed to do. Now, people have used them as weapons. People have, that kind of thing has occurred. But by and large, that has not been anywhere close to its dominant function. Its dominant function has been in accordance with its telos. Some technologies, as they grow in complexity, so digital technologies are particularly prone to this because if I judge technology by how many steps it takes after I introduce my step, there's an interesting sort of categorization of technology that occurs, and digital technologies perform many steps from my small step.
Yes.
Whereas a hammer, it's pretty much you swing it, it
Right.
does it, you swing it, it does it. So
Another one.
it's very easy to understand. But as you get into digital technologies, they have so many additional steps that they can often lead to extremely unusual outcomes. And this is not always the case. In fact, there's quite a bit of variation with digital technologies, but they usually deal with complexity. General operation things tend to be the ones that have the most steps that they can perform beyond you, and they're the ones that lead to the most aberrative outcomes. So, if I introduce the smartphone into daily society, and it's supposed to make a lot of small communication things much easier, and in fact, even do some things like if I see some sort of emergency happening, it's really easy to get on the phone and call for some kind of help right out of the gate. So it's got those little kinds of advantages. But if I look at how it's dominantly used as a means to deprive ourselves of boredom
Yes.
and to remove things that cause anxiety, which often are social interactions.
Yeah.
So a lot of my students, and this is one reason it's so poignant for me, is I see it among college age kids so much. They are socially inept, and I mean inept, and they have no idea. They have no clue.
In our age, the homeschool kids are the only ones that actually know how to talk to people.
Yes.
It was the opposite when we were in elementary school, high school.
Yeah, by comparison, homeschool kids were always a little more, you know, um, Well, they were a little less capable. And I think homeschoolers kind of recognize that issue and have been working on it, whereas the rest of the population has been flipping the other direction.
Yep.
So they're
Yep.
completely inept. And if you read Jonathan Haidt, who's done most of the research related to the effect of smartphones on young people, you'll find that generally what he criticizes them for are mass deprivations. It takes things away. It takes away sleep. It takes away social interaction in person. It replaces it with facsimile of social interaction. It takes away kind of meaningful entertainment and attention and boredom, all things that it turns out are actually very valuable.
Yes.
And so I look at smartphones, and somebody could definitely debate this with me, but I think in general they're a net negative. I think we're actually kind of better off without them. Yeah, we would lose some things, but we'd actually gain quite a bit more because something about having that ever present concept is actually kind of damaging in the long run. So they would either require a lot of modification. So as soon as I get into that debate, though, and we're talking about whether it's net positive or net negative, that seems to me like we're having debate on whether or not the tool is good or bad rather than neutral. And so I don't know that I can build the assumption that something is neutral in it because I have a hard time coming up with a good argument other than some people use this for bad, some people use this for good. That's kind of the foundational argument of the neutrality of a tool. But if we look at tools, do we not see dominant effects? Do those effects not matter? Is that not something? Because smartphones are not opt in, opt out. They're required now for just about everything.
Yeah.
Cars are required now. If you live in most places in the world, especially in the US, I live in a place where I have to have a car. It's not a question. And so, if technology is in fact in this way where it moves in waves that then require us to do things, and they have net negatives and net positives, in precisely what way are they neutral? I don't quite understand an argument for its neutrality at this point. And I'm open to the idea of it, but just in my own examination, I haven't really found a way to pose that argument to myself.
Yes, I'm very sympathetic to everything that you've expressed. I don't disagree with it necessarily, but I would just from a, devil's advocate point of view would say, okay, a lot of people would say the same thing about Christianity, right? Oh, my experience with Christians and with Christian communities and with the church and looking through history or whatever is a net negative. So the world would be better off without it. When you and I would say there is no neutrality here. It's by far the only thing that's good. It's the foundation of what's good. It's the definer of what's good.
Hmm.
But we also could acknowledge there are many people who have borne the name of Christ or the church and done horrible things to a person or people or nation or whatever. So I- and I haven't seen I guess the taboo that you mentioned that makes it sort of an all or nothing conversation. I'm not regularly engaging in these conversations like you are on Twitter either.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I've painted a target on my back, and not even so much on Twitter. It's actually way more in higher ed,
Oh,
way
okay.
more. Yeah,
Okay. I could definitely see that. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, because I feel like there's a guy, Scott Adams. I don't know if you know him or watch any of his stuff, but
I think
he,
is that the Dilbert guy? Is that
yeah,
who
yeah,
that is?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But he's also a trained hypnotist. He's an expert in persuasion, and he does a daily live stream where he talks about current events and talks about reframing it in persuasion mindset and things like that. But anyway, one of the things that he discusses from time to time, he calls it the Adams law of slow moving disasters. And so he applies this to something like, the climate issue that is such a polarized thing that unless we completely blow up our entire society, the planet is going to catch on fire versus no, we don't need to do anything. Everything's fine. Just keep, uh, boiling gasoline and whatever else we're doing, right? And he says the reality is there's this tension between the two. We need that tension because what that does is that helps us recognize when there are issues and we make these corrections. And because it is this slow moving disaster, we eventually sort of fix some of the issues that we have. Uh, so in relation to what we're talking about, I developed a lot of friendships in high school, but particularly in college. I went to University of Memphis my first 2 years and developed some really strong relationships there. And so then when I went to film school in North Carolina, my only way of communicating with those people, many of whom did not have cell phones, I was one of the few people that had a cell phone when I went to film school, um, was AOL Instant Messenger. And so that meant the only way I could communicate with those people if I was in my room when they happened to be online. And so I probably spent more time in my room because those were my Christian friends from Memphis. I didn't have a lot of Christian friends at film school because it was an arts, very liberal
Mm,
arts school. And so that was my community. It was not in the space where I was. And so that kept me tied at home. And I knew some of the, effects that was having in my socialization at the school and things like that. And I tried to kind of balance that as well as some 19, 20-year-old kid, thinks about those things. Um, but I just remember when things like, text messaging and the iPhone and stuff, that was like, felt like I was unshackled, that I could still be in touch with my community, but now I could like go out and like see the sun and touch grass. And so for me, it was an advancement in technology that didn't put me in a cage. It felt like it let me out of one. And again, of
mhm,
course, I'm an early adopter to all this stuff always. And so I was not part of a society where everyone was at home on their instant messenger necessarily. There were a lot of us, but um, and so I feel like with a lot of these technologies, I think right now I do see a lot of people talking about how this is poison. It's an opioid drip, and we got to treat
mhm,
it the same way that we've treated the opioid crisis. And we've got to. I mean, the thing is, look, I pulled my an adductor muscle in my leg like a month and a half ago, and for that first week it was super painful. And then he prescribed me a light opioid, and I was like a little. I was kind of scared of taking it. He was like, "It's fine. It's light. It's okay." And I took it, and it was fine, and it was good, and it helped. And so
mhm.
that's a drug that has a purpose. Do we look at all the problems that it's caused and all the and heroin and fentanyl and everything else and say that that's a net negative because we don't hear about the stories when it helps somebody. We hear about the stories where AI is ruining people's lives or it's taking over an industry or people are getting fired. We hear about all these things because it's high spectacle. But I don't know how many people are going to hear about how I use it every day, which is it's the first thing in 47 years that has helped me enjoy getting up early, getting to work, and working on meaningful stuff all day long and staying focused. No one else has ever been able to help me to do that. And somehow this works. And the little system that I've created, it's not much more. I mean, I would functionally, utility wise, get the same thing out of printing out a sheet of paper and working through it on a sheet of paper all day long. But I could have done that since 1990 something, and I can't do it. I don't know what it is. I can't do that. But this is really exciting and engaging to me. It's helping me eat better. I'm starting to manage my money. I mean, it's like, and part of it is because of the things that I've in particular been interested in, growing up in Cleveland, Tennessee, really interested in movies. Who was going to be my mentor, you know?
Mhm.
And even in film school, wanting to make films about Christian themes, who was going to be my mentor, you know? And so I've met some people who are filmmakers and Christian, and they're in Los Angeles, and I can contact them from time to time. But even then, that might be the only thing that we have in common. Our politics might be disparate, or our tastes might be disparate, or whatever. And so I learn things from them, but I'm not in any sort of mentoring relationship with them or anything. They're there for me to get advice from or something. But my parents are awesome. I won the parent lottery. They have loved me. They have encouraged me. They supported me in all kinds of things. They've given me a great background, good character, good spiritual foundation. But like my mom can't help me be a better filmmaker. She didn't know how to do that. My dad made car brakes, and was a white collar guy in a blue collar world for a long time and did awesome. And his people loved him. And he taught me how to a lot of the character that I try to have on set. I learned from him how he did his job, but he doesn't know how to make a movie. And so and there I guess are just some things about me. I hate these neurotypical or atypical labels that people want to put on everything. I kind of feel like everybody can't be autistic, like everybody can't be ADHD. Like if everybody has it, then maybe it's not a thing. Like I don't know. I think
Well, what it would be is neuronormative at that point.
right, yes.
Yeah.
Like I think a couple of you are just psychopaths. I think there's that happening. But anyway, so I don't know what's going on in here. I don't want to be diagnosed with anything. I just want to do what I've been doing. But there's clearly something in here that nothing else has gotten through, and I'm using this tool, and it's really helping me. And and it's at least right now, I think it's a net positive for me in the same way that somebody that has chronic pain management, an opioid would probably be a net positive for them to take that
Yeah.
for their life, right? So, as you said, it, it's not a bipolar thing. There is some
Yeah.
kind of spectrum or something in there. And so I guess that's what you and I are both trying to get to in our own ways, which is um, how do we, so as a director, when I'm on set, every decision, that's all I'm doing is making decisions as a director. I'm not doing hardly anything. I'm not touching anything. I'm not acting in front of the camera, this kind of stuff. Like other people are doing all the things. What I'm doing is directing all the people that are doing the actual things. So the wardrobe person is designing the dresses. But I would say, oh, this one, not that one. Less of this, more of that. Go this direction, not that direction. That's the job of the director. And unless I have a vision for what the story is going to be, if unless I have a real deep understanding of, the moral message and the theme and what we're trying to accomplish, then one dress is as good as another. But if I know what I'm trying to accomplish in the story, if I know what I'm trying to accomplish in the scene, then it's very easy for me to pick which one is best, even if maybe the wardrobe designer doesn't have all that vision or information herself. But my goal also is to empower the rest of my crew to be able to make those decisions on their own by sharing that vision and sharing what those criteria are, right? So I think that's what you and I are sort of getting at, which is what's the criteria? What's the vision here? Um, we could be Amish, but the thing about the
Hmm.
Amish, the reason why it works in the Amish is because it's the whole community. It is the
Well,
whole community.
that's the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not
That's
one
that's the
person
key.
going, I'm going to go be Amish. It is the whole community, and it doesn't really work without that.
Yeah.
So you and I are not Amish and probably not going to be so. And it sounds like you might be wanting to go a little less, and I might be willing to accept a little more intrusion and silliness and that sort of thing. But what's the divining rod here? Well,
Mhm.
it's very easy to say, okay, love God, love people, but of course that can be interpreted a million different ways. So what are the more what's the finer tip on this spear of living alongside this thing and using it for, I mean, again, going back to the first century, um, at the time of the first century, there were two types of things for sharing writing, the scroll and the codex. And so, the codex, of course, was a collection of pages that was stitched together, what we would call a book, right? Everything else was
Yeah.
on scroll. At the time of the first century, it was about 75, 85% scroll and a little bit codex. It was kind of a new technology.
Yeah.
And the early Christians took big advantage of this new technology to very quickly spread their message because they could take letters of Paul or gospels that were written down and disseminate them quickly in order to get their message out. They took advantage of the road system and
Yeah.
this time in Rome. So I feel like as somebody who, a couple of weeks ago, we saw a lot of people reaching for their Bible for the first time after the current events, right?
Yeah.
And going to church for the first time. And I wanted to do what I could to reach out on X, on TikTok. I hate TikTok, but I got on there and was posting videos and interacting with comments, even people that were driving me crazy with their comments, because I want to I want to find those people. I want to find those people that are picking up their Bible for the first time. They're overwhelmed. They don't know what they're doing. And I'm not, I don't see those people right near me, but I see them all over the place on the internet. And like, I know how to be there and I know how to do stuff there. So anyway, I guess all of this just saying, how do we winnow this out? What's the defining, because again, still net positive, net negative is still a binary thing. It may
Yeah.
not,
Eventually, it is kind of a some kind of call that has to be made. And I think the key to even the question you're asking gets back to that notion of individual versus community,
yes.
right?
Okay.
So, one of the examples that you used before, you talked about Christianity being evaluated in terms of its net positivity, net negativity, and somebody could say it's been a net negative for me, right?
Yeah.
And but that's looking at it in terms of the individual, because I would gladly have that debate on the broader scale,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I would very gladly have that debate.
Of course.
Like 60,000 orphanages just under the Catholic Church alone, right?
Yes.
Right now. So there's a question that has to be answered because there will always be somebody who can hold up a piece of technology that actually works pretty well for them, right?
Sure.
But if you're in a society that then makes its choices based upon the benefit to that individual as opposed to the detriment for a large number of people, it will always veer towards constant expansion. Like it's going to go that way. And that's really what pluralism as a notion does, where everybody kind of picks their own way of living. The place where I have found myself leaning, though, is actually that I believe that a tech-dominated society functionally is going to doom its own infrastructure. I think that happens. And I don't believe in any kind of political action to try and reduce technology use. I actually think that's useless. I think
Yeah.
countries are far too big right now to actually create cultures. You know, culture is one of those things that blossoms up from a village
Yeah.
and a series of villages interconnected with each other. And one of the great mistakes of the 20th century was trying to um, turn that into a government structure. Because I was talking with my wife earlier, we were eating lunch and talking about fascism as one does, and uh, I was
The
talking
white
about how
lunch.
yeah, yeah, Chilean fascism. But I was I was telling her that I feel like what fascism has tried to do, because it's very difficult to define fascism. You can go looking, like Umberto Eco wrote his 14 points of fascism, etc. But if you take any one of those, it looks like any number of governments that have always existed. I think fundamentally at the root of fascism was the idea that you create culture from the top down, you force it from the top down. So we're going to pull all these people together because pluralism has problems. When you've got a bunch of people who believe all different things, it
Yep.
creates dysfunction. That happens. So we're going to pull it together and we're going to actually have one singular culture. But when you try to do that, it's ludicrously unnatural. And in order to enforce it, because culture never has to be enforced, but in order to enforce that kind of culture, that sort of artificial culture, it leads to endless violence and it leads to constant self-contradiction and all kinds of problems that lead to those two imploding very quickly. So if I believe that you can't do that, you can't take culture and force it down from the top, and that would include religion, and it would include um, little things like self-restraints of different kinds. I don't think governments can effectively do that.
I agree.
What I dream of is a world in which local areas are allowed to have cultures the way that we have always had cultures, and that you're allowed to pull together in a collective and function on that smaller scale that human beings are much more attuned to. And I don't really know how that happens within the current paradigm. So instead of doing that, what I do is I try to create community with my local church. And I try to bond with other parents. We do, homeschooling group things together, that kind of stuff. And we try to create a culture where we have a series of shared values. Because at the end of the day, there's no way to really navigate this world of technology in terms of finding the right number, the right metric to force down from above. Because I think you're going to run into that culture problem over and over and over again, where it can't be done artificially in that way. And so that does mean that you're going to end up in an individualist sort of context, uh, leaving people to individual judgment, and I think trying to have that conversation about net positives and net negatives, and say, for some people, I think this might be helpful to you. I think it's hurting a lot more people than it's helping, and dealing with, having the civil debate of that, having the attempt to persuade each other, because I think that's the best you can do within the given context. But I'm not nearly as individualist as I used to be. I've asked fundamental questions of myself, like, because what I do is I illustrate. If I could never draw again, could I still live a fulfilling, satisfying life? And I was forced to, by the nature of my belief system, by the nature of my faith, to eventually say, yeah, I think I could be all right. I think that Christianity as a concept is built around the idea that you can find a satisfying existence, even in what looks to other people like uh, some kind of negative context. I have learned how to be debased and I've learned how to abound, is what Paul says. And I do these things through the one strengthening me. There's a There's a reality to Christianity that opens up the possibility of living in a context where you don't get to choose your best life and customize your reality,
Hmm.
but that you can still live in a state of goodness. And that's why I don't think that people in the past were always miserable for not getting to choose their profession. That's why I don't think that there was a bunch of really sad Roman boys 2,000 years ago who just wanted to be airline pilots because that's what they were born to do. There's something about the perception of opportunity that leads us to desire. And
Yeah.
I'm very open to much more um, unexplained taboos. We just don't do that. That was something I would have outright rejected when I was a kid because I'm an American. Excuse me.
Right.
There's nothing that's off limits for me. It is nothing but frontier that through manifest destiny I must explore. And now I look at my own kids and I say, what really is the best life that I live? If I don't use a phone at all, is that better for them or they have a better childhood? And increasingly, I find the answer to those questions are really to the best of my conscience. I believe that is true.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not alone in that. So me and my wife have started navigating technology in a very different way than we did. Because when I was growing up, those things didn't exist. Those weren't questions that my parents had to answer. And it also means that I grew up without them in the same way that I grew up without having certain nutritions deprived of me as a child. Whereas if I'm an adult, it doesn't really hurt me quite as much because I never got a smartphone until I was an adult,
Yeah.
right? So when we're thinking about the young, either our own or within our community, there's also an additional level of question that has to be asked there, which really strikes a blow to a notion of individualism, right? Where my actions have impact beyond. So it's a very complicated debate, and it's not one where I walk around feeling as though I have a firm, strong, like, here's the dividing lines, all that stuff. It all feels really squishy because it is very complicated.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think I would rather err on restraint as opposed to acceptance and really kind of force technologies to prove their safety to me
Mm.
before I adopt them.
Yeah. I feel like I think you've made some decisions maybe beyond where I am maybe. And I think you're I'm not gonna say forced, but I think you're incentivized to do that because you have a wife and five children,
Mm,
where I don't. It's just me. So um, I don't have to think about some of the things that you have been thinking about. Um, but for me, just having this conversation, just having the debate about it, like you said, is important. Because the more you talk about something, the more it rises in importance in people's minds,
yeah.
and the more they question, what is this thing, that I have here? I used to drink several sodas a day, and then when I changed my diet several years ago, it was like soda is poison, and now I see other people doing it. I'm like, why would you do that to yourself? When I used to do it all the
I
time.
got one right here actually, but it's
Exactly. Yeah.
ginger ale. It's not too bad.
Yeah. Oh, I still have some now, but I went through this period where it
Yeah.
was just like, oh, it's like rat poison. Why would you do that? Um, but I have not been I'm not as smart or as wise as you were to ask myself the question, if I couldn't be a filmmaker, uh, could I still be happy? And yet, God was gracious enough to sort of hit me with it, just because there was this time when I had a small group in my house every Thursday night, and I love my big church that I was a part of. I guess I was working there at the time. Um, but I don't know. I've always been an introverted, artistic weirdo, and I just didn't really. I don't like the big room, and I don't fit in. And it's a family church for married people with kids, and I don't have any of that. So I love them, and I love the church, but I just never really felt at home there. But Thursday night, that was my church. These five or six people, whoever would come in on Thursday night, um, that was my church, and a couple of them I was spending other time during the week, just sort of one on one, doing real discipling work, like I felt like I learned a really healthy way to do it because it was just reading the scripture and helping them discover what was there. So it was in community and relationship, but it had to be sort of there, what God was revealing to them, and what they were experiencing through their own obedience, and wasn't me like lecturing them on their behavior and stuff like that. So these really rich relationships. And I remember thinking, at that point in time, I really like making narrative motion picture media, movies, TV series. I really want to do that. Really, really, really want to do that. And I think the Lord wants me to do that. I think He's given me the talents and the skills to do that and to communicate in this way. And just everything I see lining up for me, I still think that's what He has wanted me to do all these years. But if I never got to do that, I'd be okay because this is the whole thing right here, this relationship that I've got going on. I would love to have wife, children, family, all that stuff too. Could I be happy without that? If I'm discipling people, if I'm in this
Mhm.
close spiritual community, I'll be okay. I will still have a rich and fulfilling life. Um, so I was not wise enough to ask the question myself, but God was gracious enough to give me that same kind of moment. So, um, well, I love talking about this stuff, especially with people who are more well-read and more intelligent and academic than I am. So I appreciate your indulging me in
Mhm.
these ideas.
Yeah. I mean, this is enjoyable to me. I don't have no long idea how long it's been. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but
Yeah,
uh
it's been about an hour.
has it? Okay.
I have one other friend that I met with. We're meeting on Tuesday mornings now, and he's a guy here, and he's engaged in a lot of similar things. I think that you would enjoy. In fact, I sent him your profile yesterday, but he's working on starting to write some stuff that's sort of based in Norse mythology,
Oh, okay.
and
Yeah.
yeah, he's doing some writing. He just started a Substack, and we meet every Tuesday morning to kind of iron sharpens iron and gives him a chance to kind of get away from the homeschool family. And he also teaches. He teaches at Trevecca and Nashville.
Okay. Yeah.
And anyway, so it's just very cool having this these conversations in the last couple of weeks with people that can have a similar foundation in both the art and the faith to sort of talk through some of these things. Because sometimes I have one or the other, but it's rare that I find high quality conversations about about with both things sort of involved in there.
Mhm.
So anyway, I
And I
hope.
think this is new ground for a lot of people because many like me, I'm not remotely alone, nor even on the vanguard of thinking through these questions. Turns out through the 20th century, a lot of people were thinking about technology at a time when I was completely blasé about any question, positive or negative, about it. But navigating at this point is so complicated, and there's so many angles to take it from. I think I'm just kind of scratching the surface of how do you reason through me trying to make a living when most of my commissions come through Twitter, right? So there's strangeness like that. Obviously, I have a microphone, I use social media, all this other stuff. So um, I'm looking forward to seeing this kind of conversation develop and new ways of approaching it that are more coherent. Because a lot of what's being written now and what's being said are like just the opening overtures, you know.
Yeah. So, where do you find yourself in this conversation? Where do you find yourself on this spectrum of rejection versus embracing? I'd be interested to know what your context is and how you make these decisions. Perhaps it'll provide some wisdom for all of us. If you're interested in having face to face conversations with human beings, I've got just the thing for you. It's called Five Coffees and a Book, and it's a little 5-week mini book club of how to walk through my short story, The Darkness Rolled Over Her. The story of The Darkness Rolled Over Her deals with personal relationships and deals with being able to share with and encourage one another. And so I highly recommend getting a couple of friends, reading The Darkness Rolled Over Her together, and doing 5 coffees and a book. It's a great way to make friends for life, and it's an easy way to talk about some hard things. So if you're looking for some face-to-face interaction, don't wait for friends to come along. Don't wait for someone to show you kindness and encouragement and love to come along. You go out there and you show it to somebody else because you only keep what you give away. So get out there, Godspeed, and keep moving.